Welcome to Come and See, your podcast for finding truth in a world of chaos. Brought to you by Living Waters Abide Ministries. With host and founder, Richard Case, and co-host and retreat leader, Kathy Ricconi. Join us every weekday at this time to discuss news, spend time in the Word, and receive answers to your personal questions about living life in God's truth. And now your host, Richard Case.
Well, good morning, everybody. This is, there's Rabbi. This is End Times Friday, and we are having this session. Next session will be with our good friends Eric and Ephraim from Israel, catching up on lots happening right now in the middle of all kinds of events, and we want to discuss those and process those together. Welcome, everybody. Where are you guys? Are you guys both in Jerusalem, or Eric, are you in Tel Aviv? Or?
I'm in Tel Aviv.
And I'm in Jerusalem.
Well, it's good to have you. Denny had come up with just kind of a construct. I just want to throw this up a minute and just say that as we discuss things, and this is just a construct that we'll pursue over the next several months, is, there's anti-Semitism. Why is Israel under such scrutiny? All kinds of geopolitical instability, pressure on definition of moral clarity, which is interesting because both sides complain to be moral. Leadership, the public fatigue of what's going on. What does it mean in terms of, is there an expectation of the Messiah? And then, what is being revealed about that? So we'll kind of use this as over the next several months of just exploring various things. But the first one would be, we know that supposedly the last body was returned from the hostage situation. So tell us what's happening in Gaza. What has that meant? What is the condition in Gaza right now relative to what is Hamas doing and what is Israel doing?
Well, there was a special assembly of various units from the army that were dispatched to a cemetery, a Muslim cemetery in northern part of Gaza City, where a captive that was from the group Palestinian Islamic Jihad that the army had captured and interrogated, who identified that this is the likely place for this last hostage, who was actually killed on October 7th. He was on the Israeli police force, not serving in the army at the time. And he had rushed down to, I think, near Oz, one of the settlements near the Gaza area to try to help rescue the people under attack, and was killed in the fighting and then taken into Gaza and buried. And it was a pretty gruesome operation. Literally, there were, a few hundred IDF soldiers and specialists literally digging in this Muslim cemetery up bodies, and they would test them initially against engravings of the teeth to try to identify. I think Ron Kvili is the guy's name who passed away, was killed, and lo and behold, they found his body, and then they had to replace all the bodies back in their graves where they had dug them up. So as best they could, they left the cemetery in the condition that they found it. And then they took that body back and then positively identified him using genetic data. And then he was buried, I think, within a day or two of that finding. And it was a pretty major day throughout the country. Government officials attended the Levaya, which is the funeral. It was sort of several different kinds of ceremonies were taking place, including the forum for the hostage families that had their last. At the end of Shabbat, you have this Havdalah service, and since the capture of these hostages, they've been having this service every Saturday night at the end of Shabbat, and they had the last one, and then that was kind of the end. And so now these demonstrations for the hostages are now a thing in the past, and there have been a lot more interviews taking place of the captives and the living ones who have been found. And what I would say that they're like, Ephraim can comment separately, but I feel like I've identified two major themes that I would relate to what the hostages have been saying consistently between each other. Everyone's experience has been different. But number one, it's quite obvious that there was severe sexual abuse of both the male and female hostages by these terrorists. Again, let me repeat, sexual abuse of both male and female hostages by these terrorists. And it's believed that even many who aren't talking about it are just ashamed of it and not saying anything. That's the general perception and belief here. And the other theme, and again, I'm not a biblical scholar here, but in the book of Genesis, Bereshit, they talk about this episode where God decides he wants to destroy Sodom and Gomorrah because of all the paganism and decay and depravity that's taking place in these cities. And Abraham is advocating on behalf of these cities not to have them destroyed. And then he's told, well, look, if you can find 10 good people in the city, then I will spare them. And he goes and he can't find 10 good people, and so they end up getting destroyed. So I say that to preface that it's being pretty common that the comments you're hearing from the hostages are they can't find 10 good people inside Gaza, meaning that if your listeners may remember at the beginning of this process and towards the early part of the war, Israel, the government announced a reward program that anyone providing information about a living hostage, that would lead, of course, to their recovery. There was like a one or several $1 million posted would be the reward plus guaranteed safety out of Gaza if they wanted. And basically, there was no response to this reward program. So you combine that with the comments coming back from the hostages who are saying things like, there wasn't a single person in Gaza that didn't want to tear my head off, to sort of put it bluntly. And so I would say these are the two common themes I'm hearing the hostages saying.
Yeah, if I can just add to that, the sexual abuse is coming up more and more now. But what has been coming up from the time of the very first releases was that they've been almost all of them were severely starved for up to 2 years, like on a quarter of a pita, which is the equivalent of less than a slice of bread a day, and some water, occasionally very, very little water, and allowed to shower once a week at most. And a lot of the men were tied down with chains the entire time, tied with their legs were tied to chains. Sometimes their legs and their hands were tied to chains in complete darkness. And that humiliation and fear tactics and like emotional abuse was used constantly against them, saying that Israel has forgotten about them, their family doesn't care about them, saying you two, between you two hostages, decide which of you we're going to kill one of you. You guys have to decide which one. And they would like play that game for hours and hours. They would torture them in all sorts of really horrible ways, men and women. And yeah, and just touching on the consistent thing that they're all saying, that there are no good people, no good Samaritans in Gaza. A lot of the hostages saying that they had opportunities to escape, and they knew that was crazy, because the moment they would have stepped outside, they were going to be lynched by the crowd. They knew that would be a suicide, because when they were brought in, everyone, until they got them into their hiding places, or when they had to move them from place to place, Hamas would have to disguise them and hide them and protect them against mobs that were calling for their blood and calling to rip them apart limb by limb. And they knew it was hopeless to try and escape. Other ones said that they actually prayed for that their captors, the guards that were watching them, would be effective, because they knew that if the guards left, that the people would come in from the outside and kill them. So that's the situation. And I think I've mentioned before that the people that lived on the kibbutzim, that whole area that were attacked, they used to tell their children that they used to educate their children from the day that they were born, that we're all human beings and we all have to learn to live together, and we all want the same things in life, and we just have to respect one another. And now they teach their children that there is such thing as evil. And that's like a big shock for a lot of people who just don't want to accept that. Like we have sort of, been traumatized into realizing that as much as we might want peace and coexistence and to live in harmony with our neighbors, they want to kill us, like literally, like it's not an exaggeration. They, being like virtually everybody, have been taught and conditioned for 18 years to kill us under radical Muslim ideology, which they've been taught for close to 2 decades. So that's our reality, and it's not pleasant to look at. And some people might say that's Islamophobic, but it's just it's the reality of what is out there.
Yeah.
I had two thoughts. on
Go ahead,
this,
Denny.
what you just said. First of all, this is just shocking just to listen to the way you describe it. And it makes me even think how sugar-coated my view of this has been, even though we've been meeting regularly, just to hear this. So it's sort of miraculous that any of these bodies were returned, that anyone alive got out, given what you just said, even though there was a framework for that. It's amazing anyone got out. The second thing.
They got out because they were very valuable to Hamas because they were big bargaining. In fact, the reports coming out now, the documentation that the IDF is slowly releasing to the public was the original plans of Sinwar, the guy who led all this terror attack, was to hold on to the hostages for several years. That was his plan, not just to get them released the way he had.
But then the torture and the way they were treated, that seems inconsistent with these being valuable bargaining chips.
No, it's not at all, because the essence of the bargaining chip is that they be alive. The condition of their being alive doesn't matter. The fact that they're alive means that they're very valuable to Israel, and they can, for every living hostage, they can get, I don't know, depending upon the ratio, anywhere between 30 to 100 terrorists out of Israeli prisons. And for that reason, they were very valuable.
And ceasefires. And so they had to keep them alive, but at the very minimal condition possible.
One question, and I have actually a couple, but one is that at this point, typically, there is a world court that actually then starts to hold people accountable for what they call war crimes. And war crimes are just as simple. If you've tortured your prisoners, you've committed a war crime. Is there any of that at all in play at all? Or is the world just turning its head and ignoring completely what you've just described to us, which we would think most of the world would see that as complete depravity and complete injustice?
Well, it's actually a lot worse than what you might describe. And the perversion of the world today is that the victims are being prosecuted as the perpetrators. So there are reports coming in, not every day, but maybe weekly, of an Israeli who happens to be in Europe on a vacation or something, or maybe a business trip, and they're being there's an attempt to drag them into court because they're Israeli, they're being accused of genocide. And there was just a report I read earlier in the week that there's an academic in Belgium who posted an article saying that if you're attached to a university anywhere in Europe and you do not vocally and publicly accuse Israel of genocide, you're being ostracized by your peers within the academic community. So this is a case where the victims it's a total farce that especially in Europe, where they basically inverted justice. And so if your listeners remember, the International Court had basically issued warrants for, I think it was 4 people, 2 of the leaders of the Hamas who led the terror attack, and our Prime Minister, Benjamin Netanyahu, and our Defense Minister, Yoav Golan. And the 2 Hamas that was accused of war crimes have been killed, but there are still warrants out for our Prime Minister and our former Defense Minister, which is beyond perversion.
I'll add also that not only is there no international cry to bring these people to justice, but Israel has been slowly talking about how it will bring these people to justice. There's hundreds and hundreds of terrorists that participated in October 7th in the attack, and also in terrorists that were fighting the war for 2 years afterwards, continuing to as Hamas terrorists and other Palestinian factions. And so Israel is soon going to start some sort of a trial. And you can be sure that not only will Israel be supported, but whatever type of judgment Israel will choose to bring down on these people, there will probably be international condemnation and pushback against whatever Israel plans to do with these people.
Yeah. In that regard, exactly what is happening in Gaza. What does Hamas have control of? And is Israel, anybody from Israel, the IDF, any of them still there at all? Are they doing anything at all? One. And then two is, as you see Israel, let's say, carry that out, do you feel that that actually will contribute to even a deeper level of anti-Semitism, even though it's right to do for their own country? It's going to lead to a deeper anti-Semitism. What do you guys think about, first of all, what's happening right now in Gaza? What's the status of Gaza?
So in Gaza right now, there is what's being called a yellow line. And what this is a demarcation of a informal barrier. It's a formal demarcation, but there's no wall. It's just sort of marked by certain posts in the ground where the IDF is positioned, and that's around the perimeter of the Gaza Strip. And it's a little more than half the total land area, and the bulk of the population. And there are citizens of Gaza who are living and leading, I wouldn't call it normal lives, but they don't have issues with water or food or getting around and or their family and so on. And some of them are living in actual concrete homes, which is most homes here are constructed of concrete, one form or another. And they're being governed by local clans, which is the traditional way that the Arabs in this part of the world have ruled themselves over the years. And then the other part of Gaza, which is about, I guess, like 47% of the land area, is occupied by the vast majority of residents of the Gaza Strip. And for the most part, not all, but probably about 75, 80% of them are living in tents. And while today is kind of a sunny day, it has been getting cold and there has been rain. So the conditions of their living conditions aren't very pleasant. There are Israelis who are saying that, something should be done about them. There are Israelis who say they brought this on themselves and they'll live through the day, but it's not the most pleasant living conditions. And there's no running water, and the sewage system is not very pleasant, but they're alive and they're living in tents and they're being fed. I would say not necessarily daily, but a few times a week, there are attempts by Hamas terrorists to come. There are a few remaining tunnels. Every week, we're reading about one or two tunnels that are uncovered and being blown up. Like just, I think 2 days ago, there were several Hamas terrorists that emerged out of a tunnel, and they tried to perpetrate an attack on Israeli soldiers. There was one seriously injured. They killed a few of the terrorists. They captured one alive. I'm in Tel Aviv, and my apartment overlooks the main hospital, and there's a helipad on top of the hospital. So when there are injured soldiers coming out of Gaza, they're often brought here. And just about 2 hours ago, an Army helicopter brought in one injured soldier who was taken on a gurney. I can see because I can see from my window into the hospital for being treated. And then what will happen is Israel will they've mapped out various targets where they know Hamas has got its operations, and then they'll take them in retaliation. They'll take out a Hamas target. That gets reported in the press, but of course the fact that the soldiers were attacked by Hamas terrorists to provoke it doesn't get reported. So you'll see reports in the Saudi press, the Arabian press, or the other Arab press, especially Al Jazeera, that Israel incurred into Gaza and killed a Hamas, blah, blah, blah. But they failed to neglect to report the fact that Hamas launched the initial attack. And that's going on once or twice a week, I would say. And just yesterday, there was a reserve soldier from the Israeli army seriously injured in such an attack. At the same time, on about a weekly basis, I could hear the jets over my house flying off to Lebanon. I would say there are operations taking place 3 or 4 times a week in southern Lebanon, where the Israeli Air Force is either through a drone or a jet fighter attack is taking out a Hezbollah facility or a commander or whatever, and that's just going on a regular basis.
Is the goal on both of those with Israel to keep observing and then preventing both of them from regaining much strength on their border? Is that the objective of what they're operating under?
I think you've pretty much nailed it. I think there has been a major shift in the IDF's strategic view on how to deal with the situation. Israel, as a policy, is no longer going to wait and allow its enemies, terrorist enemies, to accumulate the strength and the infrastructure on which to launch a major attack. Instead, the goal now is to prevent them from even accumulating the ability to launch an attack.
Yeah.
So there's going to be a lot of preemptive attacks going on. You see them going on in Lebanon, and it'll happen more and more in Gaza, is my guess.
Yeah, thank you so much for both of you sharing. We want to pick this up again in our next session and talk about all that this means as you're looking at Iran, with what's happening in Iran, which seems to be collapsing, so to speak. But America's coming, and we want to discuss that aspect of it. What is happening in Iran, and what is Israel's position on that, and what do you see happening? So thank you both for sharing with us this very interesting stuff. We're just overwhelmed and grieved at the depravity, and it's pure evil. We pray our listeners, and we'll help other people learn to realize the evil of it and not to twist it, not let it be twisted. It's just awful that it is. And it's sad to me that the world wouldn't see the truth of it, because it's not that complicated to see that. So we feel for what you're going through, and we are going to lift you up and pray. So thank you so much for sharing, and we'll pick you up again in the next session.
Thank you for joining us for today's episode of Come and See, your podcast for truth in a world of chaos. Brought to you by Living Waters Abide Ministries. Send us your questions and comments, and tune in tomorrow for more answers to your personal questions about living life in God's truth. Remember, God's will is best and none better. His truth brings peace in this world of chaos.